All right, all right. All right, we're going to get started. We're a few minutes late, but I would love to get started on our Bitcoin and Truth panel. I already kind of communicated to most of these guys that I am going to look to stay out of their way because I think that they collectively have way more to say than I do. So I'm going to hopefully stay out of their way. But why don't we get started, and we'll start with you, Robert. Just sort of introduce yourself for people who might not know who you are and kind of how you end up here.
My name is Robert Breedlove. I host the What is Money show. I guess I'm somewhat of a long-time Bitcoiner at this point, and I'm committed to the separation of money and state.
All right, that's better. Hi, I'm Tomer Strolight. I'm not sure how I ended up here. I write a lot about Bitcoin, and I try to write a lot about the connection between Bitcoin and truth. And I guess that's maybe how I ended up.
Hey, I'm Bitcoin Mechanic, or Lex sometimes known as. Been a Bitcoiner for about 11 years now, coming up to that. And yeah, I'm an old school experienced Bitcoiner and a newbie Christian. So that's a nice, there's a lot of people here the other way around, so happy to trade knowledge there.
Like Bitcoin Mechanic, I've been a Bitcoiner longer than I've been a Christian, and I co-host the Noted Bitcoin podcast with Michael Goldstein, and I also helped him, and sometimes help him, continue to help him with the Nakamoto Institute. Let's see, what else? I'm on the advisory board of Riot Blockchain, a Bitcoin mining company, and a product manager at Kraken and Exchange.
Hi everybody, I'm Giacomo Zucco. As you can see from the similarity, I am the stunt double of Robert for action scenes. No, I was introduced to the Miami conference as a Zach's Bucks CEO. That's an inner joke, but I will explain. I was a Christian way before being a Bitcoiner because I was raised as Christian. Then I became a little bit rebel during my teenager. And now I think I'm back. So we'll see.
I think I'm back. That's a good way to describe it. So I mentioned to kind of you guys beforehand, but really the driving question that I'd love to get to is, and I feel it in my own life, and I'm sure a lot of people do, is this sort of, the more I interact with Bitcoin, the more it sort of forces me to think deeply about other things. And so I guess I'll put it to you, Robert, and then we can kind of, whoever wants to jump in, but has that been your experience? And if so, what has it driven you to?
Absolutely. Bitcoin makes you ask really fundamental questions. The What is Money show is actually named after that. But to keep the emphasis on truth, there's two ways to look at it. I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it. I'll name two. One is, and this is from the American Pragmatist, they actually say that truth is the end of inquiry. So we're engaged with this ongoing process of discovery in the world by engaging with reality. A lot of this is facilitated through markets. And that process of inquiry is constantly unveiling new things that work, right? New tools, new technologies, new socioeconomic systems, new principles even. So this discovery process, I think, via the free market is how we actually discover and rediscover truth continually. And I've written somewhat about this. The American Pragmatists distinguish this from capital T truth, which is something more like Christ embodied, versus lower T pragmatic truth. And in my writing, I've talked about basically prices, tools, and virtue being these pragmatic truths that we discover through exchange, competition, etc. Another definition of truth, or another answer to the question, what is truth, is just very simply an accurate portrayal of reality. Pretty obvious. And I guess Bitcoin, by getting you into this Austrian economic rabbit hole that's also very multidisciplinary in a lot of other domains, I guess it causes us to engage deeply with that question. And we could also say that Bitcoin itself represents a form of truth. Like if we just consider money as tokenized labor, right? It's a factor of time and energy. Well, Bitcoin's the first monetary technology in history that has a fixed supply which maps perfectly onto the realities of time and energy. So we could say that Bitcoin is an accurate portrayal of the reality of time and energy that constitutes money?
When I think about Bitcoin, really led me down a path of truth, and the technical exploration of it took me way deep in it, because every Bitcoin transaction is a statement that is verifiably true. It has a proof in it. It has a cryptographic signature, and every block is a group of those truths wrapped in another truth, which is called the proof, or in another proof, right? A proof of work. And so the whole thing, the whole process of syncing up a full node is, like Bitcoin's claim is, the whole thing is true. Every statement in this whole blockchain that's now 500 or 600 gigabytes is true, and you can verify it all for yourself. And when you experience that amount of truth with no, like, not a bit of lie in it, not a white lie, not a little mistruth, it takes you to this view that, like, there is an extreme truth, and it makes you curious about what are some other extreme truths. But it's such a purely disciplined view of the truth that you then want to see what's the truth in other things, right? And it separates all the desire to slightly twist the truth from any ability to, because you cannot twist the truth in Bitcoin. You can't say, well, maybe there were 6.3 Bitcoin in the most recent block, or maybe this transaction is off by a little bit. And so it makes you curious to see the truth as it really is, whatever that ends up meaning.
Anyone else?
Well, there are at least 3 ways in which Bitcoin changed my approach to deeper truths. One is that before Bitcoin, I was coming from a very libertarian political attitude and framework. And in that framework, everything was about fluid competition. Everything was about fragmentation. So freedom is freedom to compete, to change, to differentiate, to diversificate. So my mindset was all about different stuff. Everybody with their own enterprise, stuff, idea, political inclination. It was about difference. Bitcoin confirmed this framework, but also put something on top of that, which is emergence of what we would call consensus. So even if at the base layer there is freedom, from freedom, unity can emerge, recognizing a single intersubjective hard truth. For example, that's not just for Bitcoin, that's the same in languages and math and everywhere where there is some truth emerging from freedom. It's not that somebody's forcing you to stay on the fiat coercion. You are free to experiment, but now out of freedom you can converge over truth. And the second very correlated way was the fact that it taught me, so before Bitcoin I was a guy that really loved to reinvent the wheel about everything. Like if I was studying the phonetic alphabet, I was reinventing my alphabet the same night because this is ugly, so I have to make it again. In Bitcoin, I had to learn. So when I tried to study programming, I was doing my own programming language because that one sucked. And this was a funny approach, but you cannot really build anything if you cannot recognize the tradition and the standard, and if you are not humble enough to recognize that you can reinvent the universe every time, but when you have to really make something work, you have to recognize the work of other people, and you have to bend the knee to the superiority of experience, of tradition. And that's very hard for me because before I was in a very shitcoin mentality, like I will reinvent everything every time. And then there is the last one, which is Bitcoin is weirdly connected with something deeper at some level that we are not very able yet to describe in a way that we don't seem crazy. But like I've studied physics, theoretical physics, that was my background. And when I study Bitcoin, you get deep into that and you get to this kind of fundamental concepts of time and work. Or if you were into libertarianism, maybe you know John Locke. You know the theory of John Locke, and you have 2 principles. Homesteading, so mixing your labor with land, and contracts. And Bitcoin is basically proof of work and then signatures. So there is a lot of stuff in Bitcoin that, even if it's just a tool, it's such an important tool that, and we are looking, maybe every aspect of creation, if you just look at it enough, you will find reflection of something deeper.
I think I'd like to make a comment about the context Bitcoin exists in with regard to truth. I think truth, like in a sort of if you're talking about truth as an abstract construct in the most abstract sense, it's boring almost because it doesn't exist in relation to dishonesty. And in that sense, I think Bitcoin serves essentially as a giant mirror. And it's maybe not even that remarkable for that reason. It's really just that everything else that it exposes as being so dishonest and corrupt, just in its very existence, it just goes, here, check it out. Like, here's a ledger, you know, it gets added to every 10 minutes, TikTok, next block. It's boring. But everything else that it exposes is just so utterly screwed up and so convoluted that it's remarkable in that sense. But it really serves no greater purpose than a mirror in that regard, I think.
Yeah, a lot of that resonated with me. I think that in terms of my personal journey, there were two aspects to Bitcoin that really helped me understand Christianity. One is just the time component, right? We've heard time brought up several times now. And the Bitcoin's deflationary, right? It's increasing in your purchasing power in that sense. But also so that frees up time because that means that you're not getting your time stolen from you by inflation. The other way that Bitcoin frees up time is if you don't have to think about other investments. So if you don't have to spend time researching companies, researching the stock market, researching bonds, and you don't have to spend time looking at charts because you're just going to just buy and hold, that frees up a lot of time. In addition, if you're not spending time online shopping because you're trying to save money so that you can stack more sats and have a bigger stash of Bitcoin, that's going to save you lots of time as well. And what that leads to is perhaps a vacuum, right? There's an emptiness where things that you used to spend time on, you don't need to spend time on them anymore. And that might give you an opportunity for greater reflection, and perhaps openness to the Holy Spirit coming down on you. So I think the time aspect is important. The second is materialism. I think that materialism hides God, materialism hides truth, and that it is perhaps the number one spiritual illness that we experience in the modern world is materialism. And Bitcoin dematerializes. So what used to be something physical, like a gold bar or a house, or you could take any number of examples of factory land, it dematerializes into 12 or 24 words. And it really means that you can have an arbitrary amount of value in these words. And this is unprecedented in human history, that words could have so much value. And I think that process of dematerialization really kind of rips off the veil of our mass consumer society, where now it's no longer that because somebody's driving around in a Lambo or that they have luxuries, that ascribes value to them and to their lifestyle. Now to me, that when I see that, I don't, maybe it's cured me of envy, where I'm like, well, I'm glad I don't have to pay that bill. I'm glad I don't have to pay the maintenance on that car, because that's probably super expensive. And I would feel stressed out every time I got into that car because I'd be afraid of damaging it. So I'd rather have, an old used vehicle, and that's going to make a less stressful life. It's going to be less expensive, stack more sats. But I also think that it's good from a spiritual perspective of, not putting so much value into worldly goods.
Pierre, sitting in.
Yeah, these chairs are really nice.
They are not ours. They have been provided by the theater. We will never choose these chairs.
Very grateful for these chairs. They're very comfortable.
All right. Not a scam.
So something that I heard almost all of you kind of talk about, and it's probably been said a few times today as well, is this idea of Bitcoin being lowercase t truth, and it kind of being, kind kind of opening the door to this capital T truth. But I also think there's a possibility for it to shield us from the capital T truth, right? It almost becomes too consuming. Instead of it freeing up our time, it kind of consumes our time. And so I guess I'll start with you, Robert, but is there ways for us to protect against that? Do we have to protect against that? What are your thoughts on that kind of idea of it? It can kind of either open the door or even slam it shut.
Well, I mean, in my own experience, I think just engaging with these topics deeply gives you just a more fundamental grip on the world. And for me, at least, that's led to a lot more freedom in the way Pierre is describing, right? More free time, less diversification in my portfolio, less research, less trading, all of that. All of these things that used to consume me as someone, just your standard issue American trying to outperform inflation. Now I just save in Bitcoin, right? Now hold a few dollars for what I need to do to live. That's given me great liberation. So I don't see the time that Bitcoin consumes in my mind as a waste at all. In fact, it's the inexhaustible teacher, or the bottomless rabbit hole in a way. And those deep inquiries, again, if we're defining truth as the end of inquiry, I feel as though it's brought me closer to truth. And I mean, I have Bitcoin to thank, honestly, for bringing me back closer to Christianity as well. So all of those things are deeply intertwined from my perspective.
Yeah, I think Bitcoin brings people closer to truth. Even when you hear the story of how Bitcoin came to be, you hear the story of Satoshi Nakamoto, it shatters all these things that we thought were truths that we now see are lies. We believed beforehand that governments can control everything. We believed that corporations can take ownership of everything. We believed that the only motivation someone might have for doing something is money, power, or fame. And we believed that if experts said something can't be done, then they're right. But Satoshi comes around and he solves this problem that experts said couldn't be solved in a way that no government can stop, in a way that no corporation can take over. And he doesn't do it for wealth, and he doesn't do it for fame, and he doesn't do it for power. So suddenly there's a lot of new truth, right? All these things that we thought were true, we realize they're not. And now we can look at the rest of the world without the blinders on of thinking that, oh, well, he must be doing it for the money, or he must be doing it, the government's going to stop it. And so now we have a lot more truth to explore and a lot more truth to discover. And I think that's what all of the intellectual engagement in Bitcoin is doing. It's starting to look at everything else in the world now, saying, well, if the government's not in charge of education, what might education actually be? If the government's not in charge of telling you what you should eat and how much quantity, maybe I need to figure it out for myself. So it takes us there. And given the context of this panel, the government's not God, right? The government doesn't decide what's moral and what isn't by decree. There's a truth out there that's deeper.
That's a good point. It definitely undermines that. The Bitcoin has, I wasn't going to make this point, but that's an excellent point. It undermines trust in authorities and institutions perfectly. It's red-pilling people, to use that expression, because everything you hear from anyone with any credentials will tell you Bitcoin's, a terrible thing. It's bad. It doesn't work, or whatever the case may be. And that very quickly makes people go, I'm going to have to learn for myself, because all the people I trusted and outsourced my thinking to cannot be relied upon, it seems. So it was certainly a big red pill for me, Bitcoin. And that's red pill being a euphemism for pursuit of unapproved truth, so to speak. But I'll also remark upon your second point there about it becoming a shield, so to speak, with pursuit of other kinds of truth. And I think I'll just celebrate it here, because it encourages deep inquiry where you might not have seen the use of engaging in deep inquiry previously. Because if I give you $10 worth of something, you're not going to commit to it, or commit to understanding it, or approaching ownership of that thing with any of the same kind of responsibility as you would have if I gave you $10 billion worth of that thing. And inevitably, if you buy Bitcoin and hold it, even if you lose it, you're going to be motivated along the way to go, I need to understand this thing better. And there aren't really any reliable sources of it. And it's not a company with friendly marketing material to give me for me to learn about. I just have to actually learn and pursue truth here and figure out what's real here, because there's nothing more important than this. I have children, I have grandchildren, I have an unconfiscatable asset. I have hope for the first time. Not to paraphrase all the celebrations done by Michael Saylor and all these people, but it is hope for so many people. But you need to understand if it really is offering you what it might be offering you. And that requires a lot of inquiry, and it requires a lot of honest questions and pursuit of truth, and just the ability to engage in that mental process is resistance training for your own ability to be logically inquiring and be honest with yourself, and that's going to expand to other areas without doubt.
You mentioned that Bitcoin doesn't have like a professional marketing behind it, but what it does have is organic memes. And I actually think that Christianity is the same in that regard. And the first meme that spoke to my soul and woke it up was, Jesus died for our sins. And that phrase from the outside doesn't really like make any sense, right? You would have to do some deep dive, deep inquiry into why did this phrase travel 2 millennia? How did it survive? Because things that are false, like they don't last for 2 millennia, right? They come and go with the fashions. And I think that by thinking about Bitcoin for so much, for so long, and far too much during the day, I was more open to the idea that the marketing for Christianity might have these slogans that I don't understand, but then if I actually do the deep dive on it, that there's some truth behind it where I actually would be persuaded by it. So I think that, and then at the same time though, since going into Christianity and learning about it, now I do try to think about Bitcoin less and to think about God and to think about Jesus more. So it kind of came full circle, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I think there is what did I say? I didn't say anything yet. Now you assume I'm making a joke even before I speak. No, I think that there is a risk to idolize Bitcoin, so there may be that risk to use it as a fetish, as something that is hiding a deeper truth, but we are somehow protected by this risk by the fact that Lex mentioned it before, that Bitcoin itself is kind of boring. I mean, if you really want to go deep into Bitcoin, that's an infinite rabbit hole, true. But if you just wanted to use it to protect your wealth, I mean, learn how to store your keys, okay, run a node, and that's okay. I mean, you can do it, really. And then maybe learn some privacy, and you're done. Compare it with a new financial diversification strategy to beat inflation with a composite basket of commodities. Compare it with DeFi, world computer sharding with CryptoKitties on top, and I mean, compare with all this techno bubble. And I mean, Bitcoin is simple, it's boring. So the fact that it opens up a lot of possible triggers and excuses to dive into deeper truth is good. But there is not that much to stop in front of you as an idol, as some kind of fetish. What I've noticed is that people will not really idolize Bitcoin, but they will often idolize their own interpretation, their own limited interpretation of Bitcoin, which is also known as the Bitcoin derangement syndrome. So you think Bitcoin may be a low-cost exchange unit, a low-cost medium of exchange. Okay, so you just focus on that, and everything which is just goes outside the narrative, you will just fight it, and you will end up as somebody that we will not name, but that ended up like that. Or other ways, you cannot, if you just see privacy, if you just see inflation resistance, if you just see one aspect, you can fall in love with that very small part of Bitcoin, and you can miss the bigger picture. So if you want to survive Bitcoin derangement syndrome, you have to be, you have to look at Bitcoin and not at your own partial interpretation.
That's great. One of the points that I feel like came up towards the end is this idea of what I feel like I even see kind of in the crypto space is this idea of the deeper I watch, guys like you go down and understand Bitcoin, the less you feel the need to sort of sales pitch Bitcoin, right? It's sort of like, hey, truth will win, right? And I think about what you're talking about, this idea of Christ and truth itself, is that truth wins. Like that is a Bitcoin belief, is that at the end of the day, Bitcoin's going to win regardless of if I convince you or not. And I think that's very similar to the idea of Christianity. I think of a story, I said I wasn't going to talk, but I think of a story in the Bible where they say that to the Jewish leaders, look at each other and say, if Jesus is who he says he is, we're fighting against God. If he's not, this will be dead in a generation, right? And similar to Bitcoin, that's a similar kind of comparative ethos, I think.
Yeah, that reminds me of a nice tie between early attempts at people trying to introduce me to Christianity. I had these people, this was just before I discovered Bitcoin, and back in my days of supreme arrogant atheism. And these people just, like, they introduced themselves, they told me what they were up to, we were at the same event, and then they, like, asked me, can we pray together? And I just sort of was like, I don't know, no, like, whatever. Like, and then, but their response is what's interesting, because it wasn't insistent, and it wasn't confrontational or anything like that. It was just a calm, okay, he's not ready yet. That's it. Because when you've got the truth on your side, you don't need to push in the way that F-heads or Dogecoiners or whatever these people that want to come and with this dishonesty and with this constant insistence, you need to insist when you're telling a lie. That's part of the hallmark of dishonesty. You need to be very insistent because you need people to believe this thing. Lies take a lot of energy. Truth does not need any energy to maintain it. It will exist regardless.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely well said, and lies do take a lot of energy because you keep having to preserve the lie with more lies, right? It's just more and more wastefulness. And that idea of just inviting someone to inquire rather than trying to impose a viewpoint, I mean, this is something deeply integrated to the ethos of Bitcoin. Because if you're trying to impose a viewpoint, that is fiat, right? Do this or believe this because I said so, or I will hurt you. And that is contradictory to what Bitcoin represents. I mean, even in the name of the show, like, I was kind of going for that angle implicitly. I just wanted to invite people into the question. And, you open up this realm of inquiry. But fiat, again, is contradictory to that. It's actually if truth is the end of inquiry, fiat is the death of inquiry. Don't ask any more questions. Just believe this. Take this at face value, or I'm going to hurt you, basically. So this idea that we have to keep asking good questions to be progressing in reality is so fundamental to the truth, I guess, and flies in the face of fiat. But the world we live in today, I mean, we see it, right? People are changing their gender to flags and ducks and all of this. And if you don't call me my gender pronoun, I'm going to hurt you or I'm going to cancel you. We're sick. There's a psychological sickness with this fiat money, this fiat culture that we've been embroiled in. And, hopefully, I would say as Bitcoiners, we believe that truth will ultimately set us free in time.
There's a quote from an old school theologian, Charles Spurgeon, that I'm thinking about. He says, you don't defend a lion, you just open the cage, right? And that's a very Bitcoin ethos, like this idea of it will win, right? When you think about truth in Christ, like he either is who he says he is or he's a scam. There's really no middle ground.
Yeah, I think this is, again, one of these things where if we're talking about Bitcoin, it benefits from being challenged. It benefits from being attacked. It benefits from people trying to say it is what it says it is. And then they attack it, and then they see that it, at least in that sense, it is what it says it is, right? All the companies in Bitcoin who supported the hard fork years ago, they said, we can change this thing. And they learned that they couldn't. And none of us knew, right? It was like, is it truly decentralized? Is it truly not? It takes someone challenging the alleged truth to prove that that truth is true, right? So the enemies of Bitcoin or the attackers of Bitcoin are really the testers of Bitcoin, and they give it the opportunity to see. And I think this is the same thing with everything spiritual. There's some assertion made, and then it gets challenged, and in its challenge, it demonstrates that it can stand up to it or that it cannot. And here we are 2,000 years later, how many thousands of years later, and it's still standing up, right? So, but this to me is, for me, I'm not trying to pander, but it's like Bitcoin led me to religion. I was a very militant atheist even a year and a half ago, and gradually found the way to truth, because so many things that I held that were true turned out not to be, right? But I thought they were because I heard convincing arguments, and arguments are one thing, and then testing the arguments in reality is another.
So true. Sadly, our time is up. Is there anything that you guys want to add kind of in closing before we wrap up?
Fiat is a living lie. Bitcoin is truth.
Pierre?
Yeah, I think that with truth, there's also verification and verification of the truth. And I often hear Bitcoiners who are still atheists say, well, how do you verify all of this? And when I first heard it, after I'd kind of converted, I was taken aback by the question, because your soul is inside of you. Like, you can verify it inside of you. So now it seems like an odd question, but that's my answer now to people is, well, you can verify it yourself.
Yeah, that's very important. There is this kind of characterization of religious attitude as just trusting, which undeniably there is an aspect of that in the concept of faith, but there is also a whole experience of theology where people try to justify and to verify and to doubt, and to see where the doubt is leading. If you go back to Descartes, you can see a Christian philosopher trying to doubt things that have been taught to him, and by doing that, he will stumble into some hard truth that he cannot deny anymore. So there is a lot of, also, as Pierre said, most of the atheist dogmas right now, they are completely unverified. You ask to a random atheist, why does he believe what he believes? And he will come up with something like, the burden of the proof is on you. But that's true compared to silence or to complete agnosticism. That's not true compared to materialism or anything like that. When you are a materialist or an active atheist, you are bringing a lot of epistemological assumption with you. And have you really verified any of it? Can you justify, I bring this up because we were discussing it, people who believe in flat earth, okay, I know, I studied some physics, I know some objections to that. People who will ridiculize these people, do they actually have the capacity to put a few logical objection in line or not? Because most of people, their main objection will be sociological. This cannot be because my teacher told me not a few years ago. But that's the only reason, just a sociological heuristics of experts cannot be wrong, which is the antithesis of Bitcoin.
I have one last point to make on that. I'd like to say that, and I'm going somewhere with this, crypto is such a lie. Almost everything you'll hear under the umbrella term crypto is a lie. And part of the reason I was an atheist for so long is because just like crypto and just like Bitcoin, contrary to what you'd naturally believe, Bitcoin suffers under the poisonous embrace of the state. People use it in the worst and most disrespectful manner to themselves and to the network as well, doing things like letting Coinbase hold all their coins, leaving everything in GBTC, diversifying into nonsense. All of that stuff is detrimental to yourself, your own freedom, and to the network as a whole, and it's only possible because it's legal and somewhat embraced by the state. And this was a big part of my being atheist for so long, because Christianity, for the longest time, was culturally dominant, and as a result became very corrupt. And as an atheist, that's all you see. You see absolutely abhorrent behavior from priests in Ireland, and that's, growing up in the UK, this was all I knew about, was the worst possible behavior a human can do, being personified in the clergy, in the institutions that I'm told I'm supposed to be a part of. And to that end, my simple point is, I'm one of the few Bitcoiners that always calls for for an antagonistic relationship with the state, and one where the state puts its foot down and says, that's it, none of this is allowed. And if that happened, overnight, crypto would be gone. And all that would remain was the one thing that was designed to be able to thrive in that circumstance, which is Bitcoin. Everything else, all the noise would be gone. And the reason I found my way out of atheism is because Christianity became a countercultural thing. And everything got blown out. No one is here that doesn't believe what they say they believe. No one in this room is here right now because of cultural pressure or something along those lines. No one is here rather be somewhere else. You all mean it and you're all sincere. And there's nothing like that. And that's what Bitcoin can be like as well, but it's what Christianity currently is like. And it's a blessing. And while you might feel persecuted because Christianity is under attack, see it as a blessing because it actually is.
Wow. Well, that honestly feels like a really good place to kind of wrap up and stop. So why don't we give them a round of applause and just thank them for their time. Thank you, guys. We're actually going to do one last thing at the end. If I can invite Jimmy up real quick.